In the past 48 hours I have been mugged out $200 and gained a black eye, nearly died from anaphylaxis and just got home from work to find an email from my doctor saying my cervical cancer is back. Reddit. What is the worst 48 hours you've ever had and how did you get through it? We had a teacher at our school. We have a plaque dedicated to him. He taught during World War II. One day he received a message that his older son had just been killed in action in the middle of class, and then, half an hour later, he got another message that his younger son had died in a completely separate incident. The man taught the rest of the day, and came in the next day and the day after. He didn't miss a single hour of class the whole time. April 2007. I was away from home on a week trip to the Alaska Marine Biology Center when I get a call from my mom's doctor saying her cancer was back and had spread all throughout her chest, into some of her bone, and was growing rapidly. She went into surgery without me there and there were a lot of complications. I get another call not 4 hours later from my dad saying my big brother was in a car crash that shattered his arm and jaw and he didn't know the condition of him yet. Luckily the next day was the day I was supposed to go home. After the boat ride, we got on a bus that headed home. A pickup truck crossed the median and smashed into the bus, causing the bus to flip a few times. The guy in the truck was my best friend's dad committing suicide. I ended up being buried in luggage in the back of the bus, unable to move. When they got me out there was definitely something wrong with my hips, but x-rays showed nothing. 2008, when it was too late to fix, they discovered I had cracked my hips and my right femur. Every step I take to this day hurts like a bee. When I finally got to my home, I thought I could take a nap and go in and check on my brother the second I got up. I ended up sleeping for a few days from the shock of the crash, completely missing both my mom and brother's surgeries. My brother recovered. My mom is still recovering. My best friend didn't really talk anymore, then moved away with no warning. Because of the cancer thing my parents ended up divorcing. So I group that in with those days. The divorce is final in 2 days. Right now I'm laying down after a night of sleep, and the pain in my hips is almost unbearable. But everything came out okay, and if pain on me is the biggest thing that ended up staying from those 2 days, I'm completely alright with it. In the past 60 days I have, in order, lost my job, had my severance run out, been denied for unemployment, had my doctor tell me that I had 5 years left to live, had a friend scam me for $1,000 by telling me her dad died, had my girlfriend dump me, been kicked out of my house, and had my ex tell em she's keeping the ring and everything else. Granted, it wasn't all in 48 hours, but it has really sucked. If the ring was an engagement ring, there's legal precedent to reclaim it on the premise that it is given on a promise to marry, not as a gift, and if that promise is broken, it is no longer legally hers. Mine was in the Gulf War in 2003 in Iraq. Lost 3 friends in a single helicopter crash. Later that day got a call from my CO saying I was being removed from theater to get home as my father and niece had been in a horrific crash. It took around 36 hours to get from where I was in Iraq to the hospital back home, during which time I had no communication, so did not know if I was going back to organize 2 funerals. Get there and my dad is unrecognizable and in ICU with a dedicated team. Niece was in another specialist children's hospital and she didn't look much better, but the smile that little trooper gave me when I walked in would break any soldier's heart. Never complained once and went on to make a full recovery. Dad took a bit longer but he made it as well. Glad things worked out for you, bud. Girlfriend broke up with me and then slept with my best friend in my bed. Aunt and uncle died. Cat died after 16 years of growing up together. Crashed my car after months of restoring it. Then found out I had glandular fever, haha. But the lower the lows, the higher the highs. This happened last weekend. I'd gotten dumped pretty viciously the night before, so I was still reeling a bit from that. The guy had sent me an email detailing all of the women he'd had magic with before me and why he had to dump me when he realized our sex wasn't magical. I stopped after work by my parents' home, which is about 50 minutes from my home. I stayed an hour, then left. As I took the exit to my apartment, I got a call from my mother, who informed me, "You know your wallet is sitting here on the kitchen counter." I immediately took the loop and headed back to my parents' home. About 10 minutes into this journey, my car started acting up. The speed dropped considerably and the RPMs shot up. The transmission was clearly failing. I was on a major highway during rush hour and just barely managed to pull off at the nearest exit. I called my mother to inform her the car was dying, then called a tow truck. I then intended to call my parents, who were en route to help me, but my phone died. I was now stranded in a strange city with no car and no phone. It then started to rain. I walked up and down the streets, knocking on random doors until someone let me use their phone. We managed to get the car towed, paid $1,500 for a repair and had it back the next day. Of course, about 50 feet into driving it for the first time, the transmission gave out again. We had to tow it all the way back to the original place. My parents offered to lend me one of their cars so I could get to work that week. Of course, 45 minutes after this offer, that loaner car broke down too. Running tally, 3 car breakdowns in less than 2 days. I am unable to get to work. I work as a short call substitute and it's difficult to plan ahead with public transportation if I'm going somewhere different every day. And then my cat crap in my bed. I got through it all just by remaining curious about how else the universe could frick with me. As things kept piling on, I could only laugh and laugh and laugh. When my car stalled in the middle of an intersection and people were honking and screaming at me, I just chuckled because, man, what could I do? Whoa, I know your breakup must hurt, but it sounds like you dodged a bullet. A bullet full of douche. Sorry about everything else. The car crap is one of my fears about driving. Everybody getting all pee when it isn't your fault. I hope the universe is just saving up some luck to throw at you and you had to get all the bad luck out of the way first. P. Took a final and then found out I had a brain tumor. I had dinner and went to sleep. Dealing with that could wait until I was rested and not hungry. On the 30th of March, 1996, my parents told me that my grandmother had been murdered by my grandfather. I basically was in shock for the next week. I don't really have any memory of what I did or who I talked to. My parents told me that they took me to my aunt and uncle's house and that I watched TV. I watched the news story about the murder and fell asleep. I don't remember any of it. I suppose that's how I got through the next 48 hours, by not remembering any of it. Shrug. Tuesday evening, we had to put my dog down. Wednesday evening, my girlfriend broke up with me. Later that night my grandfather died. I don't know how I got through it. I think my grandfather dying made me forget about the other things. Not to trivialize things, but at some point you should write a country song. I don't know about the worst 48 hours, but the last 12 months have been heck. It all started last May. I found out I was pregnant one day before my 30th birthday. My husband and I were thrilled as it was our first month really trying to conceive. A few weeks later, I miscarried the pregnancy. About a week after that, our just barely 2-year-old dog started limping. We brought her to the vet and we were assured it was just an injury. She got worse and worse. Her face and all her joints started to swell. We returned to the vet and they tested for Lyme disease which came back negative. At this point, she couldn't walk on her own. She was so close to dying. Long story short, after carpet bombing her with steroids for 6 months, her gaining nearly 20 pounds, spending thousands of dollars in vet bills and some really touch and go moments, she's in remission from whatever it was that almost killed her. That brings us to November. I'm still not pregnant. I ask my doctor for blood work. Everything appears normal but I know it isn't. After fighting with my doctor to check my insulin levels BCI don't fit the normal criteria for insulin resistance. They finally do the test and it comes back abnormal. I find out it's likely going to be very difficult to get pregnant again. Next, our cat gets diabetes and our other dog starts having seizures. My husband's business fails after the beginning of the year and our home goes up for sheriff's sale. BC Wells Fargo refused to work with us after they told us they would. We followed all their steps to save our home and they lied to us. We need to be out by next Tuesday. I went from having a wonderful, growing family and stability to an infertile, homeless person with a ton of vet bills. My entire life is in boxes. It's amazing how life can change in just a few short months. I'm so completely beaten down, but it could always be worse. We'll make it through and I hope you do too. Big internet hugs. I was having a really good day when I get a call from my dad that we should go have lunch together cause he has to tell me something. When I get there, my mum tells me she has been diagnosed with cancer. It is still early so they have options. My mum is the person I care about most in the whole world. I start to panic and call my best friend. He was my best friend for about 6 years by then, even if we have had problems because he had feelings for me. I was living in a different country so the call doesn't get through. The next morning I woke up to messages from him all over the place and call him. Tell him all about my mum. He loves my mum. He tells me he has something to tell me too. He then goes to tell me that he is now going out. Fricking. My ex-girlfriend, who he pushed me to break up with. This girl is trouble. She cheated on me and told me it was rape. Then, she tried to kill herself when I broke it off, but I still freaking cared. I left the country for her and it was only 3 weeks since the breakup. TLDR. I was informed my mum had cancer and that my best friend is freaking my ex-girlfriend in less than 24 hours. I called my mom and dad like I usually do after work. My mom sounded stressed and said that there were paramedics there and to meet her at the hospital. I asked if it was serious and she said she didn't think so. I went home, changed clothes, had a snack and left to head up to the hospital. On the way there my mom is texting me asking where I am and whatnot, all the while being very vague about my dad's condition. A few texts later and I find out my pops had passed. I floored it. It was so stupid but I was trying to get to the hospital to see him one last time. I totaled my truck getting there. Never felt so helpless in my life. He was my motivation and my mentor. It was 5 months ago and I'm still trying to cope with it as it still seems so surreal. People tell me time heals all wounds. We'll have to see. TLDR. Totaled my truck on my way to see my dying pops. Didn't make it. I get extremely pee when people are vague about things that are that freaking important. Frick beating around the bush, you goddamn tell them what's going on so they can make an informed decision. My husband and I were driving home so I could drop him off and go to my second job. He decided to pull out into a median without really checking incoming traffic and some lady swerved around a car that was turning and T-boned my car. My car was completely totaled. I fricked up my back. Didn't have my seatbelt on yet while we were pulling out, since I was thrown into the dashboard, and we both broke some bones in our hands. After a longer visit my in-laws picked us up to take us home. My Finn and my husband drove to the pharmacy to pick up our painkillers and on the way home the got rear-ended by some lady driving 45 miles per hour that dropped her Vaseline on the floor and needed it for her elbows so she decided to look for it without stopping. My husband's knee got jammed into the dashboard really hard so back to the ER we went. Same docs that treated him earlier saw him again. They were like, WTF are you doing back here? Because my car was paid off a few months prior, my husband decided to change the insurance to the cheapest option so collision wasn't covered anymore. I didn't get any money for it. Earlier that week he was fired from a great job at university for political reasons so we were freaking out about him being unemployed and becoming homeless since my 2 jobs combined couldn't cover all our expenses. I was going to school at the time too and all this was at the end of a semester. All this was right before Thanksgiving. Somehow we made it through a few months of not knowing what was going to happen. The car crash ended up getting us through a few weeks since the insurance company had to pay us for lost wages and such during the time we had to have surgery. It helped in the end even though neither insurance company could determine fault in the crash. Our lawyer had never had a case where someone had been in 2 car crashes in the same day. I don't know how we got through it all. It was the most stressful time of my life and we weren't always happy with each other during that time, but we made it through. He got a new job a few months later that paid way more than what he was making at the university. It afforded us the ability to purchase our first home. In the end it all worked out. Happy ending. I found out that my wife was leaving me by coming home and seeing a rental application with her name and her new guy's name sitting on the table. In addition to the emotional blow, I'm a full-time student and was dependent on her income to keep all of the bills paid. This put me several $1,000s short, as I was drawing from a student loan and scholarships rather than working. I'm also the primary caregiver for our son. I found out shortly afterwards that the reason she was so keen to move in with him because she was pregnant with his child. Bad 48 hours. What a bee. Still going through it. Found out yesterday when setting up a checking account someone else had already taken out a mortgage in my name. To add to the indignity, they got a house in New Jersey. Went back to my apartment to find my social security card to prove my identity. Found that while I was out somebody had broken into my apartment and stole a bunch of my crap. That was yesterday. This is no way near as bad as anyone else's, but nevertheless it was a bad day. I saved for months and months to buy a new bike, a really nice one. Finally got it, and from experience I knew to de-lock it somewhere safe. So I de-locked it in my back garden to my fence. Woke up ready to cycle to work, and someone in the night had come in the garden and used a circular saw to cut through the wood the bike was attached to. I was pretty devastated. I called in and took 1/2 a day's holiday. I walked to the bike shop to buy a new cheap bike so I could get to work. Bought it, and as I cycled to work the chain snapped. So I took the bike back to the shop and they promised to have it fixed by the end of the day. Work was about 5-6 miles away. As I was walking to work across the park there was a woman in front of me walking at the speed you don't know whether to walk slowly behind it and risk looking like a stalker, or overtake and nearly be at a jogging speed, which looks weird. I was starting to be late for work so I jogged past. As I went past her I slipped in a pile of deer poo and it went all over my trousers and shirt. The woman behind me was laughing. Understandably, I suppose. Anyway, I figured I'd get it cleaned off me at work. Nearly at work I went in a shop and bought a can of fizzy drink. I was texting my friend about how bad my day was going and spilt the drink on my phone, which broke it. I was feeling pretty down at this point. When I got to work I tried to clean the deer poo off my trousers and white shirt, but it wasn't as easy as I thought. As I left the bathroom, damp and covered in smeared deer poo, I got some funny looks. I was meant to meet people all day who come in, but instead they put me in the corner of the room away from everyone else to do some other work. I had to then walk back to the cycle shop 4 miles away. No buses, trains went to from work, and shop is 2 miles from my house. And the bike shop hadn't fixed my bike and they told me to come back tomorrow to collect it. I didn't feel in a strong negotiating point at this stage as I was covered in deer poo. Again, nowhere near as bad as everyone else is in here, but some days everything just goes wrong. I dealt with it by harboring a deep resentment towards bicycle thieves from then on. For our friends outside the USA, 6 miles, 9.7 km. Yeehaw. I have anxiety disorders, so I have strange gaps in my logic and worry about things that make no sense at all. I went through a time in 8th grade where I was afraid of suicide. I was convinced that I would suddenly want to kill myself and do it. It was really freaking weird, but I got over it in a few months. Fast forward to September of my senior year. One day I was crossing the street to get to school and I suddenly froze. See, when you have panic disorder, sometimes you have these things that I call fear epiphanies. Well, I froze, and somehow, looking at the cars rolling past in front of me, the entire suicide phobia came rushing back to me. I kept repeating in my head, "It's back. Oh God, it's back." Within 48 hours I went from a fully functional senior to locking myself in my room, shaking on my bed in the fetal position. Imagine, for a second, that you fear your own mind. You watch yourself closely every waking second, vigilantly watching out for any thoughts that might be construed as negative. You fear everything around you that you could possibly die from. You can't go in the kitchen. There's knives in there. You can't walk around on the 2nd+ floors of buildings because there are windows you could jump out of. You can't cross the street because you could throw yourself in front of a car. You can't ride in a car because you might throw yourself out the door. Even eating becomes difficult because using utensils is like being at the zoo with a snake draped across your shoulders. And after all, you might choke yourself. Guns are your worst fear, and it doesn't help that artwork of people with guns to their heads is all over the internet, like some sort of sick joke. Everything reminds you of death. When you see a pillow, you think of that one episode of that crime show where someone was smothered with a pillow. When you see the sharp corners of a table, you imagine your head smashing like a watermelon over it. Words and phrases become off limit, as anything even remotely close to death or suicide becomes phobia triggering. I can't wait for this rain to be over becomes, I can't wait for my life to be over. You can't play video games because when you shoot or stab someone you imagine yourself on the receiving end. When you see car commercials you wonder what it would be like to be under the tires. Now imagine having been fine for years, realizing in a split second that it's all coming back. I've struggled with anxiety in the past, 10 years ago for about 8 years, and was able to get it under control through therapy and meditation. Yeah, the meds didn't work, became a zombie, but the hippity dippity crap did. Glad to hear you're doing better. The worst feeling is being a prisoner to what's going on in your head. I was totaling 3 days of no sleep. It was 4 in the morning and I was the only one in the house. I get a phone call from my aunt. My cousin had hung himself. I couldn't get a hold of anyone because my mum was abroad, my sisters didn't have their phones, and my brother didn't answer. For 4 hours I was constantly ringing people to no effect to see if this was true, as I couldn't tell if I was losing it or it was real. I went roughly 12 hours without talking to a single person because I feared being locked up from imagining this scenario. When I finally did get a hold of my mum, I learned that I wasn't imagining it, and then sunk in the realization that my cousin was dead. Not 48 hours but in 5 days I lost my job, laid off from UPS right before Christmas, got a bill for $2,500 from my school due immediately, my car's transmission took a crap at my parents' house while we were there for my birthday dinner, On a Thursday when I was 8, my parents' divorce was finalized. Friday she went to celebrate with friends and I got angry because I didn't want her to go and told her I hated her and wanted to live with my father. Hurt and angry she grounds me for a week. Saturday morning, early like 3 a.m. I wake to a police officer carrying me to the neighbor's house because my mom was sick and had to be taken to the hospital. Later that morning my father arrives and sits me down and tells me the man she had been dating during their divorce and who she recently dumped had shot her in the head and killed her the previous evening. My second grade teacher used to yell at me in class in front of everyone, but also used to keep me after class to yell at me more and would smack me sometimes too. I was a good kid, not a great student, but quiet. I didn't tell anyone the first couple times, and after that he tried to get me to take my shirt off. I did, and then he tried to touch me so I freaked out and stapled his hand. He told the school and my parents I attacked him like a maniac. Nobody believed me. My dad beat me for it. My mom put me in anger management for years. The day before this I had been to the hospital and told I had a rare blood disease that has a similar result to being a hemophiliac. Sigh. This probably gets buried. It wasn't 48 hours, but I had a really crappy April last year. It started out with spraining my ankle at the beginning of the month. Then I got a cold, which turned out to be bronchitis, which developed into pneumonia, which aggravated my asthma, which hadn't been a problem since I was a child. I'm still being treated for this. I missed work for a week and ended up losing my job. I thought my luck was turning around because I had a job interview, but on the way home my car caught fire and burned to a crisp, and it turns out I didn't get the job. So, no job, no car, still feeling ill. When my girlfriend at the time decided to leave me, it was hands down the worst month of my life. I leaned on my friends and family pretty heavily, and made sure I found time to enjoy the things that helped me relax. I went from thinking I was pregnant by one hospital to being told I was miscarrying by a different hospital, to being admitted by a third hospital for being a ticking time bomb with an ectopic pregnancy. I went from scared happy to sad to terrified. Plus the dickhead who helped get me into that mess told me his dad said it wasn't his kid and he didn't have to take responsibility for it. I was probably most scared when they told me a lawyer could come in and help me get my affairs in order in case I didn't make it through the night. Best 2 days ever. But I dumped that idiot, got 2 jobs and kept myself busy. My family was awesome and I was able to get a great nanny gig and ended up meeting my now husband, not through my job, and I came out a better person in the end. Definitely stronger and more mature. Mine was my birthday 3 years ago. I was 17 and I went out with some mates to a party in the middle of nowhere, but the police ended up breaking it up. Got lost when I ran away and some guy found me and forced himself on me and fricked me pretty bad. Managed to call best mates to come and get me. He picked me up and cleaned me up. I refused hospital treatment. I was too shaken up. and took me home. Told me he would come and get me the next day to report him to the police and get me sorted out. Next day went on Facebook when I woke up to find his sister had posted RIP for him, explaining he passed away that morning. For those who want to know, he had a heart disorder and it just stopped beating. I was a complete mess for about 6 months and couldn't accept that he had gone. This overshadowed the first event, but I never really dealt with either. Ended up dropping out of education and working in a shop. Exactly where I am today. I was 15 years old and it was actually over a 4-day period. Monday, family cat mauled to death by neighborhood dogs running wild. Tuesday, my mother, 36yo, died from liver cirrhosis due to her alcoholism. I lived with my dad and stepmom and never had a chance to reconcile with her. Wed, family dog dies of cancer. Thursday, other family cat hit by a car and dies in my dad's arms. Epic gets used too much, but at 15, that was an epically crappy week. Arrived back in hometown to find house and all belongings burned in an arson fire, and that my recently estranged wife had fled the country with our 2-year-old daughter. Still no contact with daughter. Been 11 years. Fire burned a decade's worth of photography work, all negatives, prints, portfolios, guitars, mementos, and photos of said daughter. Life can be brutal sometimes. Breathe deeply and feel the strength coursing through your veins. Move forward. When I was 14, I was mugged and bashed. Went home. Father nearly hit me because he thought I was lying. This was 1 week before end of semester exams. The back window of my car was smashed out. I lost my job because the company was closing. My boyfriend broke up with me. I had to move out of my new apartment after only 2 months. I had an infected parotid gland that made the left side of my face swell up and I had to spend 7 hours in the air. Oh, and then I found out my boyfriend had been cheating on me. 2 years ago, the company I work for had a large round of layoffs, and while I sat in my car on a conference call awaiting my fate, my significant other was waiting for me to come upstairs to the doctor's office so she could be officially diagnosed with MS. Oh, and it was my birthday. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.